Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important issues. The first is with reference to our economic situation and what needs to be done about it. Of course, this is a matter of concern that has been existing for quite some time now, since early 2022, and especially since the ouster of the former Prime Minister. We've seen, of course, there has been a lot of talk with regards to a charter of economy to be developed, for there to be consensus on reforms and various matters with regards to the economy, and for strategic and fundamental changes to be employed if we are going to be able to save ourselves from this cyclical crisis situation that we keep on entering into. However, the current situation seems to be deteriorating even further, and we haven't really come to a situation where we can say that the economy is progressing in a positive direction. Of course, there has been some good news with regards to the IMF staff level agreement, but how much of that is going to, of course, impact the economic situation in the country, when exactly is it going to do so, and how long will we be able to sustain that, and whether or not meanwhile we can actually move towards a direction that is more sustainable, still remains to be seen. We also know that Fitch, which is one of the three major global rating agencies, has also downgraded Pakistan's outlook from stable to negative, citing political conditions and financing conditions as the reason behind it. Also affirmed that Pakistan's long-term foreign currency issuer default rating is now at B negative. Of course, this is a matter of concern that has been shared globally as well, and the way Pakistan's economic situation is being perceived and dealt with is also important, and whether or not we'll be able to recover from the long-term damages as well that are going to be, of course, inevitable. So we're going to be taking a look at all of that in our first segment of the show today. Our second segment is going to focus on the accession to Pakistan Day today that is being observed by Kashmiris in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and of course across the border as well as around the world. On the 19th of July in 1947, the representatives of Kashmir unanimously passed a resolution of Kashmir's accession to Pakistan, and since then we have been observing this particular day and renewing, of course, our pledge to extend moral, diplomatic and political support to Kashmiris and their just struggle for the right of self-determination. Of course, since then we have seen the situation get worse as well. The occupied valley has been one of the most militarized places of the world, and especially since the unilateral decisions taken by the Indian government in 2019, of course, the situation has also worsened, and we haven't really come close to the solution that has been guaranteed by the UN Security Council resolution. So we're going to talk more about that at the end of the show today. For this and more, of course, I've been joined in the studios as always by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment regarding the economy, I have been joined online by Dr. Kaisar Bengali, who is an economist, and we've also been joined by Dr. Abid Qayyum Suleri, who's Director SDPI. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us in the show today. I'll start with you, Dr. Kaisar. When we look at, of course, the current economic situation, it is a matter of huge concern for Pakistan and its people as well. And we also know that the dollar, of course, has been at its all-time high, and there was the record surging of 222 rupees against the dollar, flashing earlier today as well. And we also understand that this, of course, is pointing towards the larger concerns as well that have been shared by Fitch as well, taking Pakistan's outlook from stable to negative. We have, of course, been relying a lot on the IMF staff level agreement and how that is going to help us secure not just the bailout package, but then, of course, also how we'll be able to perhaps get access to money coming in from other external sources as well. But these seems to be just short-term, temporary first aid measures. When we talk about the longer term sense of the economy and the larger crisis-like situation that Pakistan currently is in, what do you think needs to be done with regards to the immediate steps? There's, of course, a lot of talk about the fundamental changes required, the charter of economy, but what needs to be done right now, and how much time do we have to act?
Thank you, Sana, for program. When I was at the Social Development Policy Institute in Karachi 20 years ago, we published reports at that time, several reports, that the direction the economy is taking from the year 2000 onward is going to result in this kind of situation. And it's very sorry, I feel sorry to see that what we predicted has come out correctly. All SPDC reports are on website, and anyone can visit them even today. Reports published in 2002, 3, they warned that the direction the country was taking was disastrous. Now, having said that, the first thing we need to do is to, as far as the dollar is concerned, is to impose drastic import restrictions and cut down imports. Without that, the drain on the dollar will not be addressed. And we'll have to use administrative measures to curtail imports. Find out where are the dollar outflows. That can be controlled short term, immediate, within weeks, and do that. Within a year or so, more measures have to be taken. Our power production has become very much dependent on imported fuel. There are power stations in the country which can operate on local fuel. I think those stations which are using imported fuel should be shut down, at least for the moment. We should only produce electricity from local fuels. It's doable. We have to shift from road transport to rail transport. This will take a year or so, or maybe 2 years to implement, because rail uses about 17% less fuel per kilometer than road transport. So if we move our long distance transportation, goods transportation to rail, we sort of have to import less fuel. And every dollar of import saved means that much less pressure on the economy. On the domestic side, we'll have to cut down our non-development expenditure. And it is not something that we need to do by here and there. 1 trillion rupee reduction is required. It will also mean you'll have to reduce your non-combat defense expenditure. Without bridging the budget deficit and the trade deficit, the economy can no longer be managed. It is out of control.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kesa. Dr. Abid, when we talk about, of course, the measures that are doable in principle, of course, there are other hurdles in the way as well, especially the political situation and uncertainty and upheaval that has existed for in the recent past, and then, of course, before that as well. There are, of course, changes that can be done and will require some time, but of course, if we start, perhaps we can salvage the situation. But I want to understand an assessment of the current situation and considering the factors and variables involved in terms of our political factors as well, and the kind of decisions that we've seen in the past, especially this year, will we be able to salvage the situation?
Well, endorsing every word that Dr. Kesa Bengali has said, I'll add that apart from this rupee deficit and trade deficit, there is a third deficit which is haunting our economy very badly, and that is a trust deficit. It is a trust deficit between and among political parties. It is a trust deficit between markets and the government, and trust deficit between government and our development partners. And that is aggravating the situation further. Now, all of us, we know that IMF is a lender of the last resort. None of the governments, neither the current government nor any of the previous governments, they went to IMF on their own accord. They went there unwillingly. They tried to do and complete the commitments made with IMF half-heartedly, and the result was that there is a sheer trust deficit now, and that is actually resulting into a situation that we have seen today, that despite a staff-level agreement, we saw a bloodbath in Forex market. Now, going forward, of course, one of the things that should be done on an immediate basis, that is some sort of track 1.5, track 2 dialogue between treasury benches and opposition benches. Whoever would be in the federal government, whether PDM or PTI or any caretaker government, they would be facing very similar kind of challenges to stabilize our macroeconomic realities. All of the federal governments, they would have to abide by the conditionalities and prior actions set by IMF. So one thing which is hampering our progress towards stabilizing economy is politicizing economy, opposition for the sake of opposition, no matter whoever, whichever party is in the opposition. We would recommend, I would recommend, there must be an economic security council, just on the lines of National Security Council, where apart from others, there must be the four chief ministers of the provinces and our armed forces leadership. In our national security policy, economic security policy is one of the pillars, and without securing economic security, I don't see any national security being secured.
Right, and that is a very pithy answer. Let me go back to Dr. Kasab Bengali. Dr. Saab, let me quote certain figures from FBR as on July 18. According to it, import bill has gone down by 20% and stands at 2.6 billion. And similarly, in energy import has gone down 11% to $746 million. Now the question at this moment is, and regarding the defense bill as well, we know that the defense ministry has cut down the defense development budget significantly. Despite all these measures, it seems that our fundamentals are not correcting themselves. Would you attribute it only to fiscal deficit and trade deficit, or there are other things involved as well?
The FBR figures that you are quoting are fairly small. I don't know over what period these figures are being quoted for.
Data as it stood on July 18th.
So if it's for 1 month, we cannot really discuss anything on 1 month figure. You have to actually take the annualized figures to discuss. And whatever is you have quoted is just too little, too late kind of thing. The 72 billion rupees deducted out of the Armed Forces Development Budget is very small. It really doesn't mean anything. Your budget deficits and your trade deficits are very large. You know, for every 100 rupees of revenue, our expenditure is more than 200 rupees, which means 2:1. For every $100 of exports, our imports are $220. You can't manage these deficits by changes on the margin. There has to be significant, and I think the point about the trust deficit is very valid. It is not just a trust deficit between the different political parties. I think there's a huge trust deficit now between the state and the people, between the government and the people. Nobody believes anything that is said at the official level anymore. You talk to people on the streets, the rickshawalas, the thelawala, they don't trust the government. They don't think anyone is doing the
Faisal,
right thing.
if you allow me, I have a political economy question, and I have to actually go to our second guest. Sir, let me ask you, Dr. Salari, since we are talking about IMF and our agreement with them, we know that a staff level agreement has already been reached. And we understand that every time there is any external payment that is due, dollar spikes in this country. That is a known. But if you look at the kind of debate that is going on national media, our media pundits are giving this impression that somehow nothing is done deal. We know that it will take a few more weeks for the board to approve that staff level agreement, but once it is done, usually it is carried forward. So why is it that our media and pundits keep on confusing people regarding such important things? It might have an impact on the markets as well then.
You see, it is having impact on the value of rupee, because all the commitments which are not fulfilled in an IMF program, especially the structural benchmarks, they automatically turn as prior actions. And the prior actions, before our case is presented to the executive board, probably in the last week of August, they are quite tough in the context of current political situation. So the prior action is on 1st of August, we would have to increase the petroleum development levy by 10 rupees per liter. Now, if the price of Brent, it doesn't come down by that time, it would mean again increasing the price of petrol and diesel. The prior action is that the government would have to notify the recommended tariff increase as by recommended by NAPRA in electricity, and the tariff increase in gas as recommended by OGRA. Again, in the current political scenario, these are not some of the measures.
I understand this. I totally get this. My humble question was regarding the staff level agreement. I understand that when MEFP actually arrived in Pakistan, there was a mention of prior actions, right? But later on, there was a staff agreement. They actually evaluated the policy and then they reached an agreement,
which are mentioned in MEFP. So staff agreement is one step. The second and major step is that government of Pakistan would have to sign off the MEFP, especially is an Annexure 1 and Annexure 2 of letter of intent. Annexure 1 is all the quantitative targets. Annexure 2 is the structural benchmarks and the prior conditions. And I'm telling you the prior conditions. These are the conditions which are to be met before our case could be presented to the IMF Executive Board. And any delay in meeting these prior actions that would have a negative fall on the value of rupee, which would keep on seeing sliding down.
So there is no agreement as of now?
There is only staff level agreement on the conditions that government of Pakistan would comply in order to present our case to the Executive Board. So the main thing is working on that MEFP, and that MEFP hasn't been signed yet.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Kassa, if we talk about the deficits, and there is another deficit which we need to discuss is fiscal deficit, and a forecast is made by Fitch regarding it, that they say that fiscal deficit would reduce in fiscal year 23 to 5.6%, and last year fiscal deficit was 6.1, whereas if we look at the target which the previous government had for attaining, that was 4.9%. Could you please make us understand what does it mean and what kind of impact it would have next year on our economy, sir?
Right, and since usually there is a dearth of time, let me also latch on to this question and ask you another follow-up question regarding State Bank of Pakistan. All this demand of its sovereignty or autonomy is there. Do you think that in the current situation where dollar actually keeps on bouncing up, the State Bank should be intervening at all?
The first question about these ratios of tax GDP ratio and debt GDP ratio, I think we have reached a stage where the discussion of whether we have now improved from 4.9 to 4.7 is all very irrelevant. Now, these ratios depend on the size of the GDP. If I can overstate my GDP by manipulating figures, which the Pakistani Finance Ministry has become quite an expert at, then these ratios will drop. And if it drops, you will say, aha, we are doing so well. Now, these are all statistical manipulation. Let me give you an example from FBR again. They recently claimed that they have crossed the revenue targets. About 6 months back, I analyzed those figures and found that the 2/3 of the increase in revenue was on customs duty, which means that the more you import, the more customs duty you collect. So FBR is very happy, and we can celebrate the increase in revenues. But what is happening? This revenue increase is coming on the back of worsening trade deficit. So this is nothing to celebrate. So I think we must stop fooling ourselves by throwing about numbers. The fact is there is an absolute reduction required in our expenditure And in our reports, absolute numbers, not percentages. Because percentages means you can manipulate the denominator and get your percentage that you want. Both Abid and myself, we are economists. We know how we can play with numbers and get the answers we want. So that stage is gone. I think we don't have the luxury of playing those games anymore. We have to be honest with ourselves. Absolute reduction in expenditure and absolute reduction in import immediately is required.
Sir, regarding the monetary policy, Dr. Bengali.
Yeah, there is a dichotomy here. The State Bank is no longer under the government of Pakistan's control. It is completely autonomous. And the last government, the outgoing government, handed over the State Bank to the IMF control, which several of us opposed, but it happened anyway. Now, inflation has two sources. There is a supply side inflation and demand side inflation. Supply side inflation occurs because you have high cost of production. The oil prices have gone up, electricity prices have gone up, wages have gone up, and so on and so forth. Demand side inflation comes when there's too much money in the economy and there are too many people out in the market buying few goods. If you have demand side inflation, then interest rate rise will help you curb inflation. But if supply side inflation, you use interest rates, you will only lead to recession.
Right, Dr. Abid, I'll come to you, and Faisal, since he's so eager to ask a question as well, can add in too. When we talk about the impact of Fitch rating, where earlier Faisal was pointing out, I also want to understand the kind of impact that all of these rating agencies also have on the economic situation and the way a country is perceived. Earlier, even though perhaps the situation wasn't exactly similar, there were parallels being drawn between Sri Lanka and Pakistan as well. How far off are we from Sri Lanka in the actual economic sense and the numbers as well? And then when we talk about Fitch rating as well that has come forward and has categorized Pakistan as being negative, where exactly do we stand in terms of what other countries are doing and performing, especially in our neighbors, and exactly what all does that even entail?
And Dr. Abid, I wanted to, a joining question as well. The energy to save, obviously Dr. Kessa earlier mentioned while talking about to reduce the energy resource, we can shift to trains. And obviously he was of the view that the energy resource needs to be reduced in terms of the use of it. I just wanted to know, there are millions of people whose businesses and jobs, they are attached to this industry. Would there be any effect on them? Of course there will be, but if there is, what kind of effect it would be? Plus, wouldn't it slow our economy?
And also what Dr. Kesser earlier was saying in terms of immediate and absolute reduction in imports and expenditures, I want to understand practically and realistically in terms of what we have in terms of the decision makers or the political situation, can that actually be done at the moment?
Well, again, all of these things, there is a political economy and political connotation to it. Of course, right now the rational and the economic principles, they will tell you that if the LNG is too expensive and a unit prepared of that expensive LNG would cost you 55 rupees per unit, there is absolutely no sense in supplying it even at this revised NEPRA recommended rate, which would be around 35 rupees per unit. It would be again a loss of 20 rupees per unit if electricity is prepared.
I understand that. My question is, can we afford such a drastic measure in terms of the way that the public would be affected?
But then, of course, the political government and the political decision maker, they will not afford a 4 or 5 or 6 hours of extended load shedding. So they would have to do something to keep on preparing electricity from expensive fuel and then subsidize selling of it. That would further infuriate IMF.
I'll come to you, Dr. Kesser. Yes.
This would be one of the impacts. So while theoretically Dr. Kesser is correct, practically it would be difficult for government to do it. On your question about the credit worthiness and credit rating, just to give you an example now that Fitch credit rating has affected us, that interest rate on our Euro bond, which were maturing on April 2024 for 10 years tenor, it has already now risen to 16%, 50.6% in total. So, of course, this is a drastic increase in our scoop bonds and Euro bond interest that we have to pay. And finally, I don't see Pakistan becoming Sri Lanka. Of course, the dynamics of our economy are much different than the Sri Lankan dynamics. But if actions are not taken, the damage control action and the mitigation actions, of course, we can be there. So in medical terminology, I can say that we are a patient that can go to coma, but of course, then this patient has quite a bit of resilience and has quite a bit of immunity in it. But we cannot over-rely on that resilience and that immunity. We need to take those corrective measures to stop being Sri Lanka, at least in economic terms.
Right. Yes, Dr. Kessi, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just one line. Your question was about whether it is politically possible to do these things. I think Dr. Suleri has already suggested having some kind of an economic security council. And all the stakeholders of the state, all political parties, other agencies, the armed forces in particular, they have to be on board. And once a consensus decision is made on the measures that need to be taken to salvage the economy, then of course you can go ahead and make it. Then one party will not accuse the other party of having done this or not done that, because they will all be signatories. And that is where you're right at the beginning of the program, you mentioned some kind of a convention, an economic coalition to be created. And I think once we do that, once all the parties that are important stakeholders in the state come together and form an agreement, then it becomes politically feasible to do it.
But Dr. Kesser,
we don't have a choice.
wasn't the national security policy earlier and the understanding of what national security is also extended to the economic security? I mean, what exactly will another body, the creation of another body, be able to help in this regard when in principle we did extend that? But
and with due respect, Dr. Bengali, and with due respect, Dr. Bengali, let me also add to this. With due respect, when you talk about the overall situation, we all see that there is need for all parties to sit together. But who will convince them? Yeah. It doesn't seem that most of them are ready to sit together.
I don't agree with that point of view. You know, I was a member of the National Finance Commission. So we had 4 provinces and the center, and there were different parties in different provinces. The center had People's Party and Sindh, and Punjab had PMLN. In 5 months, we came to an agreement. It is an agreement that is hailed by everybody. It is a consensus agreement. There is no dispute. So I think it is doable. I don't discount this fact. Yes, at this point, there's a lot of mudslinging going on, but I think everybody is aware of the situation and it can be done. If it is not done, then we will collapse.
Right. Yes. With your permission, Sana, let me direct this question to Dr. Suleri as well.
Can I just quickly get my answer with regards to the the Economic Security Council?
Yeah, I think this is a good idea. You can call it the National Security Council. You can make it a law by law, make it a body. You can make it an informal body.
No, Dr. Faisal, my question was whether or not the creation of this body will help, since essentially we had extended the understanding of national security to economic security as well. But really the impact will be in action, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the only consensus we've had in the last 20 years is run the economy by taking loans. This is the only consensus we've had. All parties, from Musharraf to People's Party to PMLN to PTI, all governments followed the same policy. Take loans and live it up, have fun. So there has been a national consensus on how economy is to be managed. It's just that consensus has got us into a blind alley. And now they have to have a consensus on how to get out of it.
Okay.
Right. Dr. Suleri, Dr. Salari, earlier you actually came up with this idea of this body, but let me remind you, recently when this whole crisis was building up, Shaukat Tareen Saab, the former finance minister who actually represents PTI, when he was asked for the necessity of charter of economy, he said that I'm all for it, but we are not going to talk to this government till the time it is in power. If there is a caretaker government, we will sit together and we will sort things out. You have worked with the previous government, you know the current government as well. The problem is that if a caretaker government comes, then our case vis-a-vis IMF actually weakens and they stop working with us because our law prohibits our caretaker governments to actually take long-term measures. So what is the solution in this situation? It is all fair when we say that we should sit together, but this is the age of populism. In that age, I don't think all parties are ready to sit together right now.
Well, Farrukh, I have a very limited sphere of influence, but whatever sphere of influence I have, I'm trying to convey to all the friends in all political parties that after the next elections, whenever they happen, and whoever would form the government would require a stable economic foundation, and it is in their interest. So whoever aspires to form a next government, they should actually try to be part of solution, try to strengthen the economic foundation, and try not to politicize some of the economic necessities, unfortunately, in which we are in Bengali Saab's term. All of them, they should play their role in how to come out from that blind alley. And if they would start politicizing it, as we have seen, there are two narratives in Pakistan, economic narratives. One narrative, which is the narrative of the government, whoever is in government, and the other narrative is narrative of the opposition, whoever is in opposition. And all the political parties, they immediately switch on from one narrative to another as soon their roles they are changed. I think it's in their own benefit to talk to each other.
Right, absolutely. And I'm glad that you spoke about two narratives, right? On one side, the opposition says that we were removed out of government because of a conspiracy, and that's why we are not going to play ball. On the other side, there is a government which, as per your own words, finds it very tough to actually make the kind of concessions or policy decisions that are needed. Should we conclude by these comments that the current government will not be able to further tighten, all these loopholes because of the unpopularity of decisions?
They will have to, if they require the next tranche from IMF, which is now badly needed for Pakistan, they can delay those actions, which would have a toll on value of rupee. But they will have to, if they want to remain in government for the next year, they can't run without IMF's next tranche. So all the unfortunate decision and all the unpopular decisions which are required to take the next tranche would be taken by the PTM government.
Yeah, Dr. Kasser, there are two equations right now. Number one is straight away, all of the parties, they should go towards a fresh general election to avoid all of the political mess right now. And there is another equation which is being obviously talked about by the government side as well, that all of the efforts should be put into improve Pakistan's economic situation right now. And when the economy is stable enough, then next year we should be going for the general election. You being an economist, what would you suggest and what would you say about it? Which equation is more suitable for Pakistan and Pakistan's economy, sir?
Yeah, I said earlier that the last four governments, Musharraf, People's Party, PMLN, and PTI, they have had a consensus on managing the economy by taking loans. If either of them, any one of them come back to power, including the caretaker government, if they have the same consensus of running the economy by taking loans and more loans, then we are not doing anything better. So it really doesn't matter to me who is in power in Islamabad or anywhere else. I think the inter-party and inter-institutional consensus is more important than holding elections and having elections are important for a democracy.
Yeah.
But at this point of time, elections are also very expensive. It will increase the velocity of money in the economy during the elections, which will feed more inflation, which
Right.
will create a bigger burden on the budget deficit. So I think immediate elections are going to worsen our economic situation.
All
But
right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr.
now
Kassim
or
Bengali
later,
and Dr.
there has to be a
Abid Qayyum.
consensus on the economy, and elections can always happen.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kassim Bengali and Dr. Abid Qayyum, for joining us and being a part of the debate. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Farrukh, a quick comment on this segment before we move on to the next one, since we are short on time.
Yeah, I understand that we have dearth of time, but I have actually wanted to use a rhetorical device to actually eliminate what is happening right now. They said that a person wanted to cross a river by swimming, and he was told that if sun sets, return to this bank, don't move ahead. He kept on swimming the whole day, and then bank was quite visible and he could reach the other side, but then the sun set and he returned and he sank and he drowned and he died, right? At this moment, all this advice to the current government, look, we didn't ask the government to actually bring down the previous one. We didn't ask them to actually take on and form a government rather than going for election. But now that they are in power, I think the sane course of action is to actually carry through and make all these policy decisions that are needed. And secondly, my request to all the media chatter boxes and noise boxes, please don't add to more chaos. Even though my complaint is that some of the leading newspapers today, when our economy is so much bad, our headlines and our super leads are basically not about economy. They are about something else, right? About judiciary or politics. But with due respect, even then, there are only so many people who understand something about economy, and most of the people who are sitting on television channels are just confusing and adding to mess. Please have mercy on this country.
Absolutely. And of course, we need the decision makers sitting in the government right now and other political parties as well to only be able to think about this and to, of course, relieve the people of their suffering and help Pakistan move towards a better direction, since this is the biggest problem that Pakistan is facing at the moment. Faisal, of course, today is also the accession to Pakistan Day, that Kashmiris in Kashmir, in Indian illegally occupied territory and across the border, and of course in other parts of the world as well, and of course in Pakistan, are observing. When we talk about this particular day, what do you think is the significance of this particular day, and also of any day for that matter, any of these days that we actually do observe with reference to Kashmir? Since of course this is something that happened back in 1947 on this day today, and now of course this has gone, the situation in Kashmir of course has gone much worse from then, and it's since the inception of Pakistan that we are observing this day, extending our support, but really, what has it done?
Sana, if we talk about this day was the start of the very first plebiscite which was made by people of Jammu and Kashmir at that time. We need to know that at that time, of course, the majority was of the Muslims, and they wanted to accede to Pakistan. Whereas if we talk about Jammu and Kashmir, it was ruled by a Hindu ruler who apparently wanted to accede to India at that time, and that's why he simply ran out of there and went to Delhi. And then of course what India did was they sent their troops because they knew that Jammu and Kashmir would accede itself to Pakistan that time. That is why later on when we saw the resolution 47 of UN, it clearly said that peace and order should be maintained, number one, and number two, of course, we have to go towards the plebiscite. At that time, the very first day when it was a demand of the people of Jammu and Kashmir at that time, it is the start of the plebiscite, and it should have been considered as a plebiscite of that day. Still, the same the same resolution exists, and it needs to be implemented.
But that's the whole point. But it hasn't been implemented, and we keep on observing this day. So my question is, what's the impact of observing this day?
Well, the impact is it is a reminder for the world that this is where it all started, and it it did not improve since that day. Since August 2019, obviously when we saw that the abrogation of 370 and 35A, it was a clear violation from the Indian side of Resolution 47 of UN, and world needs to understand this, that the very first decision which was made by the majority of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, that should have been considered as a plebiscite that day. But if not that, now is the time that all of the decisions made by the Modi regime, as Farrukh recently mentioned, that it should be considered as a Modiism, since abrogation of 370 and 35A, whatever is going on in Kashmir, everything should be reversed, and the world should come forward, and they should accept the genuine struggle of people of Kashmir.
Right, and of course that's a lot of shoulds. When we look at the situation in terms of what we were discussing earlier, we talked about how all the political parties should sit together and there should be consensus. And then when we talk about the situation, we're talking about how the world should listen and how the UNSC resolution should be applied. But Farrukh, what can we actually do?
Right, and this is my belief that we cannot actually anymore rely on shoulda, woulda, coulda, but we should be focusing on what can be done. And number one, going back to your original question that you put to Faisal, is that whatever leverage we have got, whatever even moments or memories we have got, should we let them go or should we hang tight to them, right? I think it is very important to celebrate, observe this day when Kashmiris actually showed their heart that they want to come to Pakistan. Remember that India has been one of the worst violators of international law. India first actually signed standstill agreement with Kashmir, and then later on it annexed Kashmir. And we were told that there is an instrument of an accession, and that has been signed by the Raja. I have never seen, even though I have sent people and have obtained documents from the Library of Congress, even from there, what I saw was Raja's signature are not on that device. It is his secretary who has written for the Raja and he has signed, right? That means that the whole Indian case is mala fide. When you talk about Pakistan and Pakistan's struggle, it is based on both legitimacy and human rights. So at this moment, today we are talking about legitimacy, the importance of all these agreements and the way India kept on violating it. We cannot afford to stop doing what we have been doing. We have to tell the world repeatedly that India is the guilty party here, and it continues to violate human rights.
Right.
It
That
keeps
makes
on, keep on rubbishing international pressure and commitments as well. So it is our job, and we are doing it.
Right, absolutely. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But of course, Pakistan has always extended its moral, diplomatic, and political support to the just cause of Kashmiri struggle, and will continue to do so. And I suppose when we talk about how the world needs to listen and act, it is beyond what we can do. What we can actually do is keep on telling the world again and again, whether it chooses to hear or not, what needs to be done and what really is going on in the struggle for Kashmir, and of course the Kashmiris, especially in the Indian illegally occupied territory. And we really hope that their suffering ends sooner rather than later. But of course Pakistan will continue to stand by them. That's all we have from the debate. See you tomorrow.